There's a particular kind of silence that happens when everyone at a table stops talking because of you. Not the silence that follows a joke or a shared moment of understanding. This is the silence that comes when you've been quietly repositioned in the family story, and no one will meet your eyes to explain how or why. I learned the sound of that silence on a Tuesday night in early October, when my sister looked at me across the table and said something that changed everything. She said it calmly, like she was sharing weather news. She said it while passing a plate of roasted vegetables to our father. And everyone at that table, including my parents, chose to believe her instead of asking me if it was true. The setup. What we were supposed to be talking about the dinner was supposed to be about my mother's surgery. That was the official reason everyone gathered. My mother had been scheduled for a procedure that required careful planning, conversations about recovery time, who would help with meals, who would coordinate follow-up appointments. My sister had suggested we all meet at her house because she had the biggest dining table, and she said it would be easier for Mom to rest afterward. I remember thinking it was thoughtful of her. I remember thinking she was right. The guests, my parents, my sister, her husband, one aunt who rarely speaks, and me. 7 people around a table that seats 8. There was always an empty chair, the setting a rectangular table in the dining room. White plates, silver cutlery, a centerpiece of dried flowers that never changed. The lighting was soft, warm, inviting. What I knew my mother was nervous. I knew she needed support. I knew I had been quietly helping with expenses for months. I didn't know I was about to be erased. My sister had sent me the address earlier that day, even though I'd been to her house dozens of times. That was her way of staying in control of the logistics. She liked to be the one who organized things, who remembered the details, who made the arrangements. It made her feel important. It made everyone depend on her. I used to think that was just how older sisters were. I used to think she genuinely cared about keeping the family together. I was wrong about a lot of things that night. The exact words that changed everything. My sister looked directly at me. She smiled slightly, the kind of smile that's meant to signal you're about to say something helpful or constructive. Then she said, "I think it's important everyone knows she's been exaggerating her financial situation." She said it like it was information we all needed for the family meeting to proceed properly. Like it was relevant to the conversation about Mom's surgery. Like it was a fact that had been hanging in the air too long and needed to be addressed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gesture dramatically. She said it while cutting a piece of chicken, her knife making a soft scraping sound against the plate. Then she added, "She's been asking me for money in private. She always panics about money and invents problems." She used the exact words, "invents problems." She said it calmly, as if she was reading from a report she'd prepared. As if this was something everyone already knew, but had been too polite to mention. "I think it's important everyone knows she's been exaggerating her financial situation. She's been asking me for money in private. She always panics about money and invents problems." The worst part wasn't what she said. The worst part was how she said it. There was no anger in her voice. No accusation. Just quiet concern. The kind of tone people use when they're trying to help you see yourself more clearly. The kind of tone that makes you question whether you're the unreasonable one for being upset. The sound of cutlery and the silence that followed. I've always been sensitive to sounds. Not in a clinical way, but in the way some people notice colors more intensely or remember faces more clearly. Sounds anchor me. And in that moment, as my sister spoke those words, I became aware of every small noise in the room with painful clarity. The scraping of her fork against the plate. The click of my father's knife hitting ceramic. The soft clink as my mother set her glass down. The sound became louder each time she spoke, like my ears were tuning into a frequency no one else could hear. No one asked me if it was true. Not my father, who had always been the one to demand evidence before making judgments. Not my mother, who knew me better than anyone in that room. Not my brother-in-law, who had seen me at family gatherings for years. They all just accepted the version of me my sister had presented. They all chose her story over whatever mine might be. And I sat there, staring at the condensation forming on my water glass, trying to understand how the person I'd been in that family for 35 years had been replaced so completely in the space of a single sentence. What they didn't know. The hidden truth about money. What none of them knew, what none of them would ever think to ask about, was that I had been quietly covering several family expenses for months. Not to be praised, not to be acknowledged, but because someone needed to. Mom's procedure wasn't covered by insurance the way we'd thought. There were co-pays, medication costs, transportation to appointments. I'd been paying for most of it, using the joint account our parents had set up years ago when we were both in college. An account I still had access to. An account my sister didn't realize I could still see. Every payment she accused me of requesting from her was actually money she had been receiving from that account. Every time she claimed I was asking her for help, I was actually watching her withdraw funds that belonged to both of us. She had forgotten the account existed or assumed I'd closed mine. She had no idea I could see every transaction. And she had no idea that while she was accusing me of financial instability, I was the one quietly ensuring our mother got the care she needed. Medical expenses amount. I quietly covered for Mom's treatment over 3 months. Account balance money in the joint account. She didn't know I could still access times. Asked how many times I actually asked my sister for financial help. The irony was so heavy I could barely breathe. She was accusing me of exactly what she was doing, using family money for her own benefit while presenting herself as the responsible one. But I couldn't say that. Not then. Not with everyone watching. Not when the story had already been written, and I was now the character who panicked and invented problems. The moment I started. Questioning my own memory. That's the thing about betrayal that happens slowly, in small moments that could be misinterpreted or forgotten. Eventually, you start wondering if you're the one who's wrong. Not because you doubt the facts exactly, but because everyone around you is living in a different version of reality, and after enough time, you begin to think maybe you're the one who's misremembering. Maybe you're the one who's unstable. I remember sitting in my car after that dinner, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to reconstruct the exact sequence of events. Did I imagine her saying those things? Did I mishear? Was there some context I was missing? I went over it again and again, searching for the moment where my perception might have diverged from what actually happened. That's how insidious it is. The person who's lying so calmly, so believably, that you start doubting your own ability to know truth from fiction. It took me weeks to stop questioning myself. Weeks of lying awake at night, replaying conversations, trying to find the moment where I became the person my sister described. And then one night, I realized the truth. I wasn't questioning my memory. I was questioning whether I mattered enough for anyone to care about the truth. How the family rewrote me, patterns in plain sight. Once I started paying attention, I saw the pattern everywhere. It wasn't just that one dinner. It was years of small repositionings, subtle shifts in how I was portrayed, tiny revisions to the family narrative that positioned me as less reliable, less stable, less trustworthy. Things I had dismissed as misunderstandings or simple miscommunications now revealed themselves as deliberate construction. The Christmas party, 2 years earlier. She told everyone I'd forgotten Mom's birthday, when in fact I'd sent a gift that arrived late due to shipping issues. She said it like it was characteristic of me, not a one-time mistake. The vacation planning, last summer. She informed the family I was unreliable about commitments after I had to cancel a trip due to an emergency at work. She didn't mention the emergency. She framed it as me being flaky. The phone call, 6 months before. She called me dramatic when I expressed concern about Dad's health. Not dismissive, not mean. Just gently suggesting I was overreacting, that I tended to see problems that weren't there. The Thanksgiving dinner, 3 months earlier. She made a joke about me always being stressed about money, while everyone laughed. It was presented as a funny quirk, but it planted the seed for what would come later. Each incident on its own could be dismissed. A misunderstanding, a miscommunication, a joke that landed wrong. But together they formed a pattern, a careful, deliberate rewriting of who I was in the family story. And the worst part was how deniable it all was. She was never cruel. She was never overtly malicious. She was just the concerned sister trying to help everyone see things clearly. And I was the sister who panicked, who invented problems, who couldn't be trusted with important matters. The private confrontation that changed nothing. I confronted her 3 weeks after the dinner. Not at a family gathering. Not in front of anyone else. Just us, alone, in her kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. I showed her the bank statements. I showed her the joint account. I showed her every transaction, every payment she had accused me of requesting from her. I did it calmly. I did it without raising my voice. I simply presented the evidence and asked why she would say those things about me. She didn't get angry. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She looked at the statements, then looked at me and said, "I guess I just assumed you were asking me for money because you were always talking about how stressed you were about finances." She said it like this explained everything. Like her assumption somehow justified the public humiliation, the rewriting of my character, the complete fabrication of a narrative that painted me as unstable and irresponsible. That was the moment I understood the true nature of her betrayal. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about any specific incident. It was about power. It was about her ability to define me, to control how others saw me, to rewrite my role in the family without consequence. And the most devastating part was realizing that none of it mattered to her. The evidence didn't change anything. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was the story she had already told, the version of me that everyone had accepted, and her ability to maintain that narrative regardless of facts. What I reclaimed. The slow return to myself. Here's what they never tell you about betrayal like this. You don't get closure. You don't get a moment where everything is explained and everyone sees the truth and justice is served. What you get is the slow, quiet process of reclaiming yourself. What you get is the realization that your worth isn't determined by whether your family believes you or not. What you get is the understanding that you can be the person you know yourself to be, regardless of what anyone else says or thinks. It took months. It took therapy. It took long walks where I would talk to myself out loud, reminding myself of who I actually was. It took writing down the truth, over and over, until my own version of reality felt solid again. It took accepting that my sister would never acknowledge what she did, that my parents might never fully see it, that the family narrative had been permanently altered. And it took understanding that none of that changed who I was at my core. I stopped trying to prove anything to anyone. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. I stopped measuring my worth by whether my family believed me. I just lived my life, quietly, honestly, doing the right thing because it was right, not because I needed to be seen doing it. And slowly, the tightness in my chest began to ease. Slowly, I stopped hearing the sound of cutlery every time someone spoke to me. Slowly, I remembered who I was before she decided to rewrite me. A question for you. What stories are you living? I don't know what will happen with my family. I don't know if my sister will ever acknowledge what she did. I don't know if my parents will ever see me the way I actually am. What I do know is that I can't go back to who I was before that dinner. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe the person I'm becoming is stronger, clearer, more honest about what she'll accept and what she won't. But I wonder about you. Not because I have advice or solutions. Not because I think my experience applies to your situation exactly. But because I've learned that these things happen more often than we talk about. The slow repositioning. The rewriting of character. The public humiliation disguised as concern. The family that chooses the comfortable story over the uncomfortable truth. And I wonder if you're living inside one of those stories right now. Are you being asked to accept a version of yourself that doesn't match who you know you are? Is there someone in your life who gets to define you while you lose the right to define yourself? What would it feel like to stop explaining yourself and just be who you are? I don't have answers for you. I barely have answers for myself. But I know this. The fact that you're still here, still asking questions, still trying to understand what happened, still refusing to completely disappear into the story someone else wrote for you, that matters. That's its own kind of courage. That's its own kind of victory. And that's enough for now. That has to be enough.